Welcome back to KMM Tech. Today we're going to talk about databases and specifically how I created my task database. So let's take a look at my task database. And we'll talk about the database, how I have my database set up, and then we're actually going to create this database from scratch. And I'm going to give you a couple options in creating this database as we go along. So let's go to everything. This is my task database. It has everything in it. So you'll see this is what's called a table view. You'll notice that once we go to create the database in a second, that there are different views of the database that you can have. This happens to be what's called the table view. For me, it's easiest to start in the table view because you can start laying out the columns and your options a little bit easier. I think it makes everything visible. And then once you have this, we can actually transform this into the other kinds of databases or other kind of views of the database. So let's just look at the columns that I have here. I'll start making them a little bit smaller. So there's a done checkbox. So as I finish something, I hit the done checkbox and it will mark it as done. But you'll notice that just because it's checked doesn't mean it disappears. And we'll talk about why that is in a little while. Then there's the name of the task. This is an old column that I used to use called Silo. I no longer use this. I use something different, which we'll get to in a second. There's a due date. So the due date is when the task is due or when I plan on working on that task. The next thing is the day. This is actually a formula. So what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to format the date based on this column. So the property is due date, and whatever this due date is, figure out what day it is. That's all this says. I'm actually trying to figure out a formula based on this to do something else, so it doesn't quite work yet. But this is just nice to have, so if you don't know what day like November 5th is, it'll tell you that it's a Thursday. Just a nice option to have, not something that you need to have, but it's something nice to have. Day select you can ignore. This is part of this whole formula thing that I'm trying to work on. This next column, live stream master task list. This is a relation to another one of my databases. So you'll see that there's some names in here. So what happens is that this database here, as I fill it in, if it happens to be a task that I have to do, I just add this and it puts it into my personal database. This column you can ignore as well. This is another relational database that I have for my students, my music students. So this will actually link to my music student database, which I can't show you because there's a bunch of personal data in there. This here is actually the replacement. I'm going to move this over here for the silo. So what silo used to be was basically a tag of what the task is and where it fell in my life. So HTLC is one of my clients that I work for. Photography is something that I'm working on, my photography website. YouTube is this sort of stuff. LPC is another client that I have. Personal is my personal stuff. You'll see there's my lessons silo. And I realized that having these tags existing in this database didn't really make sense. What I really wanted was I wanted to have a central location for all of my tags. So now you'll see that I have like HTLC is now a tag in this database over here. And the nice thing about this is that because these tags are in their own separate database, it becomes its own entity, and I can actually attach these tags to other databases. So it pulls in more information into a centralized location. And I'll show you how that works as we go through these lessons. Task type, this is how I get around doing recurring tasks. So if you look at my dashboard, do I have any recurring tasks coming up? I don't. Well, that's no good. Let's go to a different view. Well, that doesn't help. So what I normally do is I keep that recurring tasks right above the done check mark. So when I go to hit the done button, I'll say, oh, I can't do that because it's reminding me that it's a weekly task or a monthly task. So that's how that works. I think there was one more column. URL I stuck in there because I've been saving YouTube videos, putting them into my task database so I can watch them. So that's that. So that's my task database. So how do we create a database? Well, there's two different ways to create a database. And they both start with hitting this add new page button. Now, when you're on this page, you're going to name this. So we're going to call this task demo. Now, you can do two different things, and you need to decide before you move forward. Once you name it, you need to decide whether you want to have this database exist on its own, all by its lonesome on this little page, or do you want to have other stuff on here? In the case of a task database like this is going to be, I don't really want other stuff on here. And in most cases, I like to keep my databases separate on its own separate page and then refer to them. So like if you notice here on my dashboard, there's this little arrow here, and that says that it's pulling in that database, okay? It's actually using this page. This is just one page that's got all my tasks in it. And it takes this and it moves it, what's called the view of the database, to this page here. It doesn't really copy the data. It just refers to the data here. So that's what we're going to do here. On our task demo, we're going to create a full page database. But before that, there's another option that I want to show you because it's easier to undo this. So if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to create a table database, you'll see that I have this inline or full page. The one that we're going to create is a full page, but this is the other option I was telling you about. We have this inline thing, and I talked about this in a previous video, the difference between inline and full page. So the difference is that I can have this database here, but then I can put other stuff on here. I can say, I don't know, a to-do list. And if this were a full page database, I would not be able to do that. So I'm going to delete all this, and I'm just going to go to table. Now, if you notice, you'll see that it stretches the table all the way out into a full page, full width, and and as I click down here, you'll notice I can't do anything else because I've selected the full page database. Okay, so now we have our database. The first column that we have here is the name column. This is a column that you cannot change the property of. It has to stay title. You can change the name of it, but you can also not hide this one. It has to stay visible. So in this case, this can be the name of our task. So we'll just call this name of task. Very simple. If you want, and in the beginning, you can create your tags. Now, I'm not going to show you how to set up a tag database right away because we need to have a couple of databases before that. So what I would recommend doing is that in the beginning, you can start off by just adding your tags. So in this case, we can keep that the way it is. The next thing we'll probably want is some sort of a checkbox. And to do that, we can go to add a column by pushing the plus sign, go to property type, and go over to checkbox. And I like to call the checkbox done. Okay, and you'll see that it puts a checkbox here. Now, I like to have the checkbox all the way on the left-hand side so you can click and drag it and move it over. I also like to have the checkbox column nice and narrow, and maybe the name can be a little bit longer, but we can play around with that later. Next thing you'll probably want is a due date of some sort. So we can go to add the column, we'll type in due date, and we'll go to our text, and we're going to choose date. At this point, there are lots of other things that you can add, but this is kind of the basis. When I first started, this was how I started. It was a done checkbox, the name of the task, and the tags, and the due date, and everything else outside of that came afterwards. As I started building more stuff into it, I built in more columns. So let's start here for now, and let's talk about some other things. So we talked about the name of the task. We talked about the fact that we have a checkbox here. Let's talk about tags for a few minutes. So you'll see that when we go to the tags, you'll see that there's a multi-select. There's also a select. The difference between the select and the multi-select is when you have a select, you can only choose one item. If you have multi-select, you can choose multiple items. So let's say, for example, we want to go in and create a few options. So maybe we have personal, work, family, pets maybe. So what you need to decide is, do you want to have the ability to have multiple tags like this has, or do you want to only have one item at a time? Okay, so in this case, I can only select one at a time because I've chosen select. If I choose multi-select, you'll see that I can add all of them. I can take them away. I can only do 2 or 3 or 1. It doesn't matter. So in most cases, it probably makes sense to create it as a multi-select. And the reason I say that is because once I show you how to create views, sometimes when you switch between the multi-select and the select, it will sometimes, let me turn up my notifications, I'm sorry. It'll sometimes mess up your filters. So when in doubt, I say go with the multi-select. Let me just turn off these. So yeah, that is that. So now I'm just going to delete these for right now, just so we have a nice fresh look. So to start, we're just going to create some items here. So I hit new. You'll see that it pre-fills in the checkbox, and let's call this build task database. Okay, and as far as this goes, this is a personal thing, so I'm going to click personal. And for due date, we're going to make the due date today. And that's how you create a new task. It's that simple. Now, I'm going to create another new task, and we're going to call this one build tag, database. This can be a personal tag here as well. And we're going to create that tomorrow. And then I'm going to go and make a vet appointment. Make vet appointment. Oops. Sorry, I typed with one hand because my one other hand is stuck behind the microphone. So in this case, I can say that this maybe it's a personal task, but it's also about my pets. So it's a dual tag. And we should make the vet appointment on Wednesday. So we have 3 tasks in here. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can view these tasks. In fact, before we do that, I'm going to add another column. And this is an optional column, but I'm going to show you what it does. Actually, let's wait on that. We'll do that in a second. So let's talk about views. So if you look, we have just the table database here. Now, let's say I've gone through and I've made this task database. And I say, okay, well, this is done. And I say, well, it's done, but it's still on my list. I don't want to see that anymore. So what I can do is I can go to here where it says add a view. We're going to keep table, but I'm going to make this view, I'm going to call it to do. And when I do my, my table views, I like to keep them capitalized. It's just, I think it looks cleaner that way. So in this case, I'm going to have this called to do. And you'll see that it kind of flips things around a little bit. But you'll now notice that we have this default view, which is the view that we had before, and we now have this to-do view. So in this to-do view, I only want to see tasks that are not checked off. So I can go over here to where it says filter and say, okay, I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to change this to done. And I only want to see it if the check mark is not checked. I'm also going to go back here and go to this default view here. I'm just going to name this all. So now if I go to my to-do list, you'll see that I only have two tasks here. But if I go to all, you'll see that I have 3 because the all is going to let me see all of them. But the to-do view is only going to show me the ones that are not checked off. Now, if I start looking here and I say, okay, well, this is great, but now look, if I look here, I'll say, oh, well, this date is after this date. I want to see the most recent thing, or the closest thing to the future, right? So I'm going to sort that. So I'm going to go over here to where it says sort, and I'm going to add a sort. I'm going to say, okay, I want to sort by date, ascending. So now you'll see that this puts this task at the top of my list. Now you can sort by name of the task, you can sort by the tags, and that's actually another cool thing that you can do. You can actually prioritize your tags. So let's say, for example, I want to sort by tags. If I look at my tags, you'll see that personal, work, family, pets. That is the order that they'll sort in, okay? I can move them around. So now it'll be work first, family, personal, and then pets. So you can prioritize them and it'll sort based on the order of this list, ascending or descending. Make sense? I hope so. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about views, because there's a lot more that we can do with the views. So let's look at add a view. So another way that we can view this is as a calendar. So I'm going to call this monthly view, because the monthly view, the calendar view will show me the full month. So now you'll see that I have my 3 tasks on the 26th, 27th, and 28th. But if you notice, I had 3, one of those is checked off. I have to go and create that same filter that I created before and say, okay, we'll add a filter. I do not want to see things that are not completed. So now I have those same 2 fields. Sometimes, and I have a database that I can show you, but I'll show you how to create this here as well. I'm going to jump over to another database over here. So I have this database over here that I built. I have it as a table as well, table view. So you'll see that I've got the name, the date, the person that's responsible for it, the station, and this is the link to my database. But I have, in this case, I have a status list. So inside of status, I have prep, waiting, researching, in progress, testing, and then complete. And the reason I did that is because I can have this board view, this Kanban board view, and I can see things now. This is all the things that are in preparation. We're waiting on these things. We're researching these things. These things are in progress. We think we fixed this, and then once it's passed out of the testing phase, it becomes complete. So you'll notice that there's no done checkbox here, because I can now mark things complete. So what I've done is in my filter, you'll see that this is going to show me all things where the status is not complete. If I go back to my master list here, you'll see that I do have some items that are marked complete. So this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one are all marked complete. But because I have that filter turned on, there's nothing in this list. Okay. So I know that yesterday we were actually testing this. This is now complete. So I can take this and just drag it over it to the complete, and you'll see that it goes away. Now I no longer have anything in testing. I no longer have anything complete. But if I go back to my master list, my default view, let me see, where were we? Install cameras at defined fixed keyframe rate. There it is, right there. Fixed keyframe rate. I'm actually going to check it off. I'm probably going to get rid of the checkbox. You'll find that as you start using this, things become obsolete. But until I figure out what I really like, I tend to use both. So I'm going to probably switch over. In fact, I'm going to make that call right now. We're going to delete this. Boom. So now everything's going to be based on status. So you can build your database built on statuses. So let's go back to our test database here. Let's go back to all. And let's build in a status like we just did. And let's uncheck this one. And let's get rid of this, because we're now going to have a status. So in this case, I only want to have one thing selected. I don't want to have it in two different columns. So I'm going to use just the select, and we're going to go through and configure our options. So we can have prep. We can have in progress. Oops. We can have testing, and then we can have complete. Oops. Now, in this case, maybe it doesn't make sense to have all of that because now make a vet appointment. There's really no status that makes sense, but just for demonstration purposes. So let's say build task database. We're testing that. And then let's go to build tag database. Well, we're still trying to figure that out. So let's call that prep. And then in here, make vet appointment. Let's call that in progress. Maybe we're on the phone and we're on hold. Now, let's create that board view that we had in the other option, the other database. So add a view. In this case, it's going to be a board view. Okay. Now, the first thing you'll see is that there's something here called no status. If something doesn't have a status, it will appear here no status. I always like to make sure that there is something in there. So I'm actually going to go through and hide this column because I don't need that column. Okay. So now you'll see that we have build a task database, make vet appointment, build task database. Now, the cool thing about this is as you move this to in progress, let's look at the all view for just a second. You'll see that this one here, we're going to look at build tag database. The status is prep. So I'm going to go back to this board view. We're going to move it to in progress. And just because we moved it to in progress, you can see that it is now changed to in progress. You can also see that by clicking on this, you'll see that there's the status. It's prep. Drag it, click. Now it's in progress. Drag it. Now it's testing. Now it's complete. So as you drag this between them, it'll change the status automatically. Okay. Now, if we wanted this to function the way that other database functioned, where as soon as we move this to complete, it disappears, like we did before, well, I need to create another filter view. So in this case, I create a filter, add a filter, and then the status is not complete. So that will show me everything that's not complete. And as soon as I drag this over, it disappears. It's still in the database. It just marked complete. But because of that view hides it. If we need to get it back for whatever reason, we can go back to our all view. We can find it and change this to say prep. And if we go back to our board view, you'll see now it pops over here into the prep area. Okay. So let's go back to our board view, our table view, because I want to understand something else on top of all of this. Everything in Notion, if you remember my first video about Notion, everything is either a page or a text block. As you create these entries inside of Notion, it becomes a page, which means that you can have the status of a page, you can have tags of a page, we can add properties, which are added to the table over here. But we can now say, okay, I want to reference something else, or I want to make a list here. Like let's say this task has a to-do list. So to build a task database, we have to figure out columns. MNS. What else do we need to do? Figure out status. And in this case, I actually know that I created a page for this. So I can link to my page of notes. I can link this to a page. And what did I call this? This is number 3, I think. So you can do a search for number 3 here. Number 3, how I created my task database. So I can go here and say, okay, here we go. This is the things that I wanted to talk about. Okay. So we've talked about, starting with a table first instead of using a list or a board view. And the reason that we like to do the table first, because you can see all the columns as you prep. We talked about how you had to keep that name field, figure out what kind of columns you want, build it up, create different views. We showed you how to create different views. Now I'm going to show you how to link a database on a different page. So what that means is that if you remember, we talked about this database and how it lives in its own page, and we can't add anything else to this. But let's say we want to have this task database inside of our dashboard or our home page of Notion. So if you look at my task list, you'll see that my master task list is just that. It's a full page database. I cannot add anything to it. So here's what I did. I went to my dashboard. I said, okay, I want to build this dashboard. And then I want to take the view of that dashboard and stick it here and stick it here and stick it here. And you'll see that I have a today view, I have a tomorrow view, and I have a no due date view. So what I can do is I'm going to come down here to a little fresh area. And if you hit the slash bar, or the slash rather, and type in the word link, L-I-N-K. We just use this link to page. That's how I showed you where my notes were. But what I want to do is I want to create a linked database. So what this is going to do is it's going to go through and figure out all of the databases that I have. So you'll see that there's a bunch of databases that I have inside of here. But what I specifically want is I want that task database that I created here, this task demo. So I'm going to start just typing task demo. Helps if I spell it correctly. Task demo. And here it is, task demo. So now, here's that database. It did not copy the database. It's just referring to that database. But what you'll notice is that we don't have all of those fancy views that we created over here. Those views do not come with it. So now that we're on the dashboard, we can now say, okay, what kind of view do I want? Well, maybe I just want to see, because this is by dashboard, maybe I only want to see what today is. So let's go with today. Okay, and then we're going to go to the three little dots here. Filter. Add a filter. Add a filter. Due date. In this case, I want to be able to catch things that are overdue as well. So if I just do is today, it's going to show me things that are today. Okay, but I want to see things that might potentially be overdue. So I'm going to choose is on or before today. So let's say, for example, this make vet appointment, I was really supposed to do it back here on the 8th. Now you'll see that it's now here because I chose that filter as on or before today. If I only had it so that it is today, it doesn't catch that. So if you're doing a today view, I'd recommend certainly doing on or before. That way, if you do forget to check something off, it'll stay there until you check it off. Okay. Well, I wanted that fancy view that I had before. Okay, so let's do a fancy view like we had before with a little board view. So let's go add a view. And let's go to board. Here's my board view. Again, we'll have to hide this no status. But there we go. Now, if I move this over to complete, let's say I did this. Uh-oh, it didn't disappear because I have to change my filter. Remember, we go to filter, add a filter, and status. I only want to see things that are not complete. There we go. So that's a little bit about databases. In the next few videos, I'll show what we got coming up in the meantime. So we talked about Notion pages in our last video. Today's video is about how I created my task database. The next video that we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I created my recipe database and my book database. So the nice thing about that is it's basically the same thing that we've just done. The only difference is we're going to talk about gallery views a little bit. So let me show you my recipe database. Here's my recipe database. You'll see that we have all of these nice pictures, and then inside of each of these you'll see that we have the ingredients that we need. In this case it's a box recipe actually, so let's find one that's not a box recipe. Here's one. So here's the ingredients that I need. That's a bad example as well because just throw it in the crock pot. How about that one? Nope. One of these actually has actual instructions. There we go. So we have our checkbox for here, and then we have the actual directions on how to actually make the thing. So that's what we'll show you how to do next week. Again, this is all, I actually built this whole thing inside of a table. Okay, and just like I showed you before, every entry is just a page. And you have the ingredients. And you have, oops. You have ingredients and the directions all on that page. So we'll show you next week is how we go through and how we create the different gallery views, how we stick the pictures in there. And then what I've done is I've actually then done a full sort. So this is all my beef recipes. These are all my sides. These are all my soups. So I'll show you how to do all of that in next week's episode. I'll do the same thing with my book database. My book database is essentially the same thing as the recipe database, But there's a few things here and there that we'll show you how to do. Here's the book database in table view. But I'm going to show you how to do actually a formula next week. Because one of the things I like to have is I like to have the author shown this way. But I like to have it, I like to be able to sort it by just having the last name of the author. So we'll talk a little bit about formulas next week as well. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and that bell notification. And if you like what we're doing, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And we'll see you guys next time.